which deals with the sacrifices. It is a good opportunity to study the Pesach sacrifice for the upcoming holiday. Well, the Pesach, when we say Pesach without any other context, in this study, we're talking about the Korban Pesach, the sacrificial Pesach. While the Pesach has some elements of a traditional sacrifice, it lacks other types, such as, my quote disappeared. Okay. Such as, luckily I know where I got it from. The animal is not placed upon the altar. There's no requirement for dismember and skin. Dismember and skin the animal after slaughtering. No blood is sprinkled and no kohanim are involved. At least in the initial one. Interestingly, after the initial Korban Pesach was offered, now the initial one was offered in Egypt before the Exodus. They didn't have another one for about 40 years because the rule was that they were supposed to start it once they got into Israel, and they weren't in Israel. All right, I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but for now we'll go here. The most basic observance of Pesach is bringing the Pesach offering. The Pesach offering is a lamb that is sacrificed on the 14th night, the 14th of Nisan at twilight, and then eaten on the first night of the holiday of Pesach, on the 15th day of the month of Pesach. The observance of the holiday is meant to try to relive, to a certain degree. There's other aspects to it as well, but the main thrust of the Seder is to try to relive the original supper that was eaten in haste in anticipation of freedom coming at any time. They were about to leave Egypt, so this was a rushed meal. So let's just look at the text in the Chumash first. Does somebody want to read?
I will do it.
Thank you, Shel.
Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby, in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire, with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishment to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord.
Any questions on that one? So there's discussion in the Mishnah that talks about the the sacrifice that was offered in Egypt, which is different to the sacrifice that was offered later. For instance, you didn't need to put the blood on your doorposts after. That was a one-time thing. And instead, the Kohanim would actually put the blood on the Mizbeach, on the altar in the temple, the way it was done for other sacrifices. And there are other differences as well, including that you can only do the Korban Pesach in Israel, as opposed to, obviously, they were in Egypt. They were probably ritually impure, and you weren't allowed to offer it if you were ritually impure. All right, does somebody want to read the next one, next section?
I'll read.
Thank you, Judy.
Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of this house until morning. For when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite.
26.
Okay, 26. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage, and the Israelites went and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did.
Right, so one of the key pieces of this that I highlighted here is you shall observe this as an institution for all time. And the obvious question is, well, we don't do it today. Why not? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, I'll just read this one. That was for the Lord a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is the Lord's one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. Some people have a tradition not to lock their door on the first night of Pesach because they have faith that they'll be protected. I'm not suggesting that, but it's an outgrowth of this idea. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it. Right? So with many things you can share with guests that are not Jewish, but not from the Korban Pesach. And there, with other sacrifices as well, there were limitations for who could eat it. But any slave a man has bought may eat of it once he has been circumcised. So and this issue of circumcision is repeated several times, this connection. And basically, you get the impression that at that time, the only thing that you needed to do in order to become part of the Jewish people, at least for a male, was to be circumcised. There's no discussion of all the other obligations that we have now, for example, going to the mikveh, a lengthy course of study, and making sure that the person doesn't have, isn't still loyal to whatever religion they came from, and all kinds of things like that. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to the Lord, all his males must be circumcised. Then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be a citizen of the country. but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. Right? So it's really emphasizing that point. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. And all the Israelites did so, as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. That very day, the Lord freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. And so while the idea of celebrating in this way seems abstract to us, it is very real to some people, including what's the name of that group? Forget the Samaritans actually still offer it. Where am I here? As well as there's a group who are practicing, getting ready essentially for getting ready for when they will be allowed to celebrate and offer it again, right? Because it says, based on the simple text of the Torah, it says that this should be done for eternity. Well, now is eternity, right? So let me see if you'll be able to hear this. This is a group of people in Israel who are practicing so that when the third temple is built, they'll be ready to offer the Korban Pesach. Let me know if you can hear it.
Passover, the festival of freedom. The very name is synonymous with redemption, the Exodus, delivery from Egyptian bondage, and the birth of the people of Israel. For 2,000 years throughout their exile, the people of Israel prayed to return to Jerusalem and for the renewal of the service of the Holy Temple. Our people have waited so long to fulfill the main commandment of Passover, the Korban Pesach, the bringing of the Passover offering. The Temple Institute was founded on the principle of doing everything within our power towards the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. This year, the Temple Institute took a giant step towards making this goal a reality, a practice Passover offering, including all the stages of the service. This was not an actual Passover offering, which can only be done on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, but a drill for the purpose of increasing Israel's knowledge and preparedness for the actual bringing of the offering the moment this becomes possible. The Kohanim, descendants of Aaron and members of Israel's priesthood who participated in this event, are members of the Temple Institute's Nezer HaKodesh Academy for Priests in Training. The Torah states, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they shall take for themselves, each man, a lamb or kid for each father's house. It shall be yours for examination until the 14th day of this month. The entire assembly of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon." The Mishnah describes the steps of the Passover offering. The entire nation of Israel converges on the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Many thousands of offerings are brought within a short period of time. The Kohanim need to be expert, sensitive, and focused. The words, "next year in rebuilt Jerusalem," are recited every year at the conclusion of the Passover Seder. But next year in rebuilt Jerusalem? Jerusalem is already rebuilt. All that remains for us is to make every effort towards the renewal of the divine service and the fulfillment of our destiny as the people of Israel. This is what the Passover Seder is really all about. This is the real Passover Seder. May we merit to bring the Passover offering this year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Blessings for a happy and kosher Passover from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem.
So clearly for these people, it's not an abstract idea, and it's gone as far as petitioning the Supreme Court in Israel multiple times to allow bringing the sacrifice on the Temple Mount, and because of not the rationale of the Supreme Court, which is a secular Supreme Court, was that it would go against the principle of the status quo in Israel and be a major security issue. But I thought seeing this video would be valuable in terms of just an interesting story, but also seeing how it was actually done. As I mentioned earlier, there were some differences at different times, but that's the general idea. All right, so the following Mishnah compares the Pesach to some other sacrifices. Does anybody else want to read? Anybody that hasn't?
Yeah.
It says, I'll read.
Thanks, Ez.
Okay. Wait, we're blocked.
I'll bring it down.
Okay. The firstborn offering, the animal tithe offering, and the Paschal offering are offerings of lesser sanctity. Their slaughter is anywhere in the temple courtyard, and their blood requires one placement, provided that the priest places it so that the blood goes on the base of the altar. The halakha differs with regard to their consumption. The firstborn offering is eaten by the priests, and the animal tithe offering is eaten by any person, for example, any ritually poor Jew. And they are eaten throughout the city of Jerusalem, prepared in any manner of food preparation for 2 days and 1 night. The Paschal offering is eaten only at night, and it is eaten only until midnight, and it is eaten only by its registrants, for example, those who registered in advance to partake of the offering, and it is eaten only roasted, not prepared in any other manner.
Right. So over here, he's contrasting with other lesser sanctity offerings and pointing out the differences. So this line, and we saw it in the Torah reading itself, but also here in the Mishnah, where you have to be registered in advance to partake of the offering, got me thinking about pods. A lot of people during the pandemic have created pods of people that they feel safe being around, and they have an agreement that they don't go within 6 feet, or however they drop the agreement of other people. And this way, it limits, if somebody gets infected, it limits the spread. And for the Korban Pesach, you had to pre-register. You can't just show up. You know, in the Haggadah we say, Kol dichben yeseh v'echal. Anybody who's hungry, come and eat. Well, that's good now, but they might have given the guy, in ancient times when the sacrifice happened, they might have given the guy some matzah and some maror, but they couldn't give him the juicy meat because he wasn't pre-registered. So the question, the obvious question is why? What's the big deal? What difference does it make? Right? The point is they offer a sacrifice, and this sacrifice was offered, and now people eat it. So I haven't seen a solid rationale spelled out, but based on different learning, one can come to a couple of conclusions. One is that it's a way of protecting the poor. So somebody who can't afford an entire animal, or even if they're just a small family and they can't finish one and they don't want the rest to go to waste. And the other thing is the kavana, to have intention in advance when it's sacrificed, because that's a big part of the mitzvah, who it's being sacrificed for, and if there's somebody who didn't if people think that they can't partake, then they may not do it all together. All right. So this is from the book of Shemot that we mentioned before. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. So another Mishnah from Pesachim. So Pesach has its own tractate in the Mishnah and in the Talmud. Shnei chavurot, 2 chavurot, or pods, or one that split a single Korban Pesach, that were eating in one house, room. The members of each chavura must turn their faces toward the members of their respective chavura while eating it. So it had to be really clear who belonged to which animal. And it's interesting, he says, and one that split a single Korban Pesach. I'm not sure what that's about, because my understanding is that it's people who split it should be able to eat together, but he seems to, in the parentheses here, making like a subdivision as well. And then from the Talmud, what is this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi that Abaye alluded to? As it was taught in the Brisa, the verse states, and if the household be too little for a lamb, then shall he and his neighbor next to his house take one. The phrase, if the household be too little, is taken to mean the household cannot afford the basic necessities of the festival. Continuing this interpretation. So it's not so much that they're small and they won't be able to finish the animal, but it's an issue of finances. Continuing this interpretation, the phrase for a lamb is then taken to mean sustain him, ha-chayehu, and the lamb, i.e., he may use the paschal lamb as a means of supporting himself. And this is a kind of a tangent here. He can take the money from his neighbor in return for registering his neighbor for a portion of his paschal lamb, and then use that money to purchase his needs. Right. The question becomes, if the neighbor pays him for the paschal lamb, does he have to contribute that money to tzedakah or something, since it was contributed for a holy purpose? And so the Talmud is saying not necessarily. All right. However, this applies only if one lacks sufficient means to purchase food to eat, but not if he lacks only sufficient means to purchase other items. So while we're on the discussion and on the same page, I found that what I thought was a pretty fascinating discussion. Continuing on this financial thing, when it comes to prostitutes. Not exactly what you might have thought was in the Talmud, but the Talmud is pretty inclusive and broad. And the Mishnah and the Brisa that the Gemara cites later on in the discussion teach that logically, were it not for a verse teaching otherwise, the prohibition against using as an offering an animal given as payment for a prostitute's services should apply in a case where the animal had already been consecrated as an offering before being given as a payment. Abaye said, if not for Rabbi Oshaya, that Rabbi Shai established that Mishnah is referring to a case of one who registers a prostitute for his paschal lamb as her payment. And this is the position in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So basically, there's a discussion of somebody going to a prostitute, and when the prostitute says, pay up, buddy, says, you know what, you can participate in my Korban Pesach. Pretty insane. I hope it never happened. But the Talmud it is known to to think of a lot of possibilities from a theoretical perspective that may never happen. But yeah, just thought that was interesting. All right, Rashi. Oh, this is what I was talking about earlier. This Rashi says that during all the 40 years they were in the wilderness, they offered only this single Passover sacrifice. All right. So I'm going to switch to this, another website that I find really good material from, and I think is really thought out in their teaching, is etzion.org.il. And so I found this interesting discussion about the Korban Pesach. All right. The Pesach as a sacrifice, the meaning of the Korban Pesach. Does somebody want to read? Is there anybody that hasn't read yet that would like to?
I'm on my phone and it's little. It's
Does that mean that you can't, or that'll be a little slow?
I'll manage. Is that where we read in Exodus? That is where that begins?
Yeah, but let me make it a little bigger.
Okay, but my screen is still small. I mean, I can make. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
We read in the Exodus narrative of God's command to Bnei Israel concerning the Pesach, the Paschal ritual, which requires taking a sheep, slaughtering it, and partaking of its meat in accordance with certain laws. Shemot, we just read that. When celebrated in Egypt, was this Paschal ritual a sort of festive meal, or was it perhaps a type of sacrifice? On the one hand, the main features that characterize the realm of korbanot are absent from this ritual. The animal is not placed upon the altar. There is no requirement to dismember and skin the animal after slaughtering. No blood is sprinkled, and no kohanim are involved. The central idea in korbanot is that of the tina giving, whether of the meat or of the blood. The absence
so
of
I'm not sure, just to clarify, I'm not sure why he says there were no kohanim involved, because my impression is that there were kohanim involved in putting the blood on the altar.
Rabbi, I think there's a pretty explicit discussion in Pesachim about how they lined up and how the pods were organized and how thousands of sacrifices were made within a relatively short period of time. So I do believe the Kohanim were involved. It might not have been on the usual place where sacrifices were made. It might have been in the courtyard or something. I don't remember.
Exactly. And I'm thinking of the same thing, but maybe what he means is that they weren't involved completely or something like that. But my understanding and as Shelley was backing up is that Kohanim were involved. All right, keep going.
The absence of these components seemingly indicates that we are not dealing here with a sacrifice, but rather with a command to conduct a special celebration.
Can you keep going, or is it too hard?
Yeah, that's okay. On the other hand, however, we indeed find a number of aspects of the Paschal offering that it shares with other sacrifices. 1. God presents the following qualifications for the animal chosen for this purpose. It shall be for you an unblemished male yearling sheep. You shall take from among the sheep or goats. These qualifications bear, where am I? I lost it.
You're in section 1.
Yeah.
The third line.
These qualifications bear considerable resemblance to the conditions that apply to other sacrifices, particularly the Korban Olah. If his sacrifice comes from the sheep, from among sheep or goats as a burnt offering, he shall offer an unblemished male. Likewise, the prohibition against leaving over some of the animal's meat, do not leave over any of it until morning, and that which is left over from it by morning you shall burn in fire. from Shemot 12:10, brings to mind the corresponding prohibition familiar to us from the realm of korbanot. The meat of his thanksgiving peace offering shall be eaten on the day of its offering. He shall not leave any of it until morning. That which is left over from the meat of the offering on the third day shall be burnt in fire. Moreover, the requirement to prepare the paschal offering roasted over the fire, its head together with its legs and entrails, is formulated similarly to the laws that apply to korbanot. Regarding the korban olah, for example, the Torah instructs, Aharon's sons, the Kohanim, shall arrange the sections of the animal, the head and the suet, on the wood that is upon the fire on the altar. He shall wash its entrails and legs in water, and the Kohen shall then offer everything on the altar as a burnt offering. 1 second.
Go to the top.
Upon the fire, I got it. A pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Pleasing? I don't know. Then Israel were commanded to eat the Korban Pesach, roasted on the fire, as well as matzot together with bitter herbs. The command to partake of matzah appears later as well. Sorry. You shall observe this day as a commemoration, and you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord for all your generations. You shall celebrate it as an eternal statute. 7 days you shall eat matzot. Why did God command them to eat matzot? This command does not seem to relate to Bnei Israel's consumption of matzah along their journey out of Egypt, as that incident occurred only later. They baked the dough that they had taken from Egypt as unleavened cakes rather than leaven because they were chased from Egypt and could not tarry, nor did they prepare food for the journey. It would thus appear that the consumption of matzot constituted part of the paschal sacrifice, just as bread accompanied the offering of the Korban Todah. If he offers it as thanksgiving, then he shall offer together with the thanksgiving sacrifice unleavened loaves mixed with oil and unleavened wafers spread with oil. According to this approach, the mitzvah to eat matzah stems primarily from the laws of the Korban, and the aspect of commemorating the hasty departure from Egypt was added only later.
So this is a really powerful statement because, right? Generally, people understand the eating of the matzah. What were you thinking, Ruth? The same thing, or
no? Was the point was if we eat matzah, I always thought, because of the hastily departure, but now this came before.
Exactly, and if
so,
it's seen, so he's not. It's not explicitly saying this is the cause and this is the effect, and they can both be true. But he's saying if this was a korban, and it certainly has a lot of the hallmarks of a korban, as other ones do, then you wouldn't have been allowed to have normal bread with it. And so that correlation where there happens to be something that looks like a korban and offering the unleavened bread, it certainly suggests that that's where it originated. Somebody want to take over? Any other readers? Let's see what else.
Where are we starting? Key to understanding.
Rabbi, it says, if nobody wants to read, I'll do it again.
You're a good man.
I'm driving in a car, or else I would do it.
Okay.
Zach, I have no doubt.
All right, I'll start. The key to understanding the nature of the Pesach lies in another unique feature of this ritual. They shall take some of the the blood, and place it upon the two doorposts and the lintel, on the homes in which they will partake of it. It appears from this verse that the Pesach ritual indeed featured an aspect of netinah, the giving of sacrificial blood, like sacrifices. This giving of blood may be compared to the placing of sacrificial blood on the corners of the altar.
So
And indeed,
Let me just stop you for a second. When I read about the Netina, what I think of reminds me a little bit of like in the high holidays, seeing blood being sprinkled. I mean, on some gut level, has to remind us of our own blood and, give us a little wake-up call that we're mortal human beings. So even though that's not the main theme here, it's certainly there, and he's saying that's a central part of sacrifice. Keep going.
Okay. And indeed, the sages comment regarding the Paschal ritual in Egypt. There were 3 altars there in Egypt, on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts. In particular, we may compare the formulation: you shall take a bundle of hyssop and dip it in the blood in the doorstep, and apply some of the blood in the doorstep onto the lintel and both doorposts, with the ritual conducted on the 8th day of the Mishkan's inauguration. He dipped his finger in the blood and placed it on the corners of the altar. Then he poured the blood on the altar's foundation.
Can you do one more?
That's our touch. Sorry.
That's okay.
We just lost it.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Take a breath. I moved it so it's on the top of the
that's
page.
not that. It touches the screen. My phone is small, and we got it back. The Paschal offering.
Yeah. We all have those phones. We know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where are we?
Right at the top left corner.
The Paschal offering transformed the entire house into an altar, a place that is entirely consecrated to God and under his protection. The notion of the altar as a place of protection which belongs to the Almighty, such that one has no right to harm somebody at that site, emerges clearly from the fact that the Torah had to specifically allow seizing a murderer from the altar to execute him. If a person deviously schemes against his fellow to kill him, you shall take him even from my altar to put him to death. We indeed find 2 occasions in Tanakh where somebody attempted to save himself from execution by clinging to the corners of the altar, both of whom fled from King Shlomo. And Adoniyahu features Shlomo. He arose and went and grabbed the corners of the altar. Yoav fled to the tent of the Lord and grabbed the corners of the altar. Had the Torah not issued this special provision, it would have been forbidden to seize a murderer from the altar, as the altar is perceived as extraterritorial space that grants asylum to people of the site. Similarly, transforming the house into an altar affords protection to Bnei Israel, who in essence become like the Kohanim as they partake of the meat of the Pesach. Thus, this ritual indeed constitutes a sacrifice, in the sense that it features the aspect of netinah, but this is a unique type of korban that transforms the home into an altar, and the people partaking, of the sacrifice into a kingdom of priests and a sacred nation.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else want to read?
I'll read it.
Who's that?
I'm going to shut this off. Who said I'll read?
Shelley.
Go for it, Shelley. Thank you.
Viewing the home as an altar also helps us understand several other halachot mentioned in the context of the Pesach. 1, God instructs it shall be eaten in one house. Do not remove any of the meat from the house outside. This prohibition is easily understood once we perceive the house as an altar. 2,
Right, because otherwise, if it, we already said there was a rule that people had to have intention and make a reservation in advance. So then theoretically, they should be able to then take it and, this family eat it in their house and this family eat it in the other house. Yeah, keep going.
2. From the obligation to eat matzah stems the prohibition against eating leaven, which appears later. 7 days you shall eat matzot, but on the first day you shall eliminate leavened products from your home. For whoever eats leaven, that soul shall be exorcised from Israel. As mentioned earlier, with regard to the obligation of eating matzah, here too, it seems unlikely that the prohibition results from that which the Torah tells later. Quote, the nation carried its dough before it leavened, an event that transpired only later. It is thus reasonable to assume that the prohibition against eating chametz also relates to the status of the home as an altar, regarding which the Torah instructs, any meal offered that you offer to the Lord shall not be prepared as leaven, no leavened products and honey. You shall not offer any of it as a fire offering to the Lord. You shall offer them to the Lord only as an initial offering, referred to the korban shetel ha-lechem, but they shall not be placed upon the offer as a pleasing fragrance. 3. In this vein, we might also explain the prohibition against boiling the meat of the Pesach and the obligation to roast it. You shall eat the meat on this night. They shall eat it roasted on the fire, as well as matzot with bitter herbs. You shall not eat it raw or boiled in water, but rather roasted over the fire. On the altar, too, of course, the meat is roasted over a fire and not boiled.
And one more paragraph.
On this basis, we shall also explain why, as a result of this extraordinary night, the firstborn of Bnei Israel were consecrated for the ritual services God establishes in chapter 13. The firstborn earned unique divine protection on this night, when the entire nation of Israel served as, quote, a kingdom of priests. Naturally, then, the firstborn were consecrated on this night for the service in the Mikdash until they were replaced by the tribe of Levi.
All right, so we'll stop here for today, but that gives us some more material for next week. Right, and I think a lot of people may miss that because there isn't that much information about it. But before the Levium, the tribe of Levi was just another tribe, like any other tribe. It was only at the time of the sacrificial lamb. No, the they call it the golden calf. When the Levium became the priests, basically, in the temple. Sure. Any questions?
Well, I am interested in why we are so desirous to get rid of any leavened product on Passover. Why chametz is so? I mean, it's almost it's more stringent than the laws of kashrut, it seems to me.
I mean, the fact that it's karet, right? That this explicitly says basically it's a death penalty if you have it, certainly contributed to that. Mm-hmm. But then there's there's a whole bunch of other things that have a death penalty in the Torah as well. I think another reason is because it's. Aren't you interested? Because it's once a year, which makes it easier. It's tangible. I mean, there are a lot of people who are, very careful and just at times even one could argue obsessive about other kosher laws. But I think these things, as well as the fact that it's such a public thing, some people get together. It's kind of the Jewish Thanksgiving in a lot of ways. I think all of that contributes to to the degree that some people go. And it's almost like a competition sometimes of who can be more machmir, who can, be more stringent, careful, to the point where somebody who's not that machmir might look at it and think these people are missing the forest for the trees. It appears I have to go. It's great to see you guys. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You know what? We may have a Seder next week, a mock Seder. I don't remember if it's next week or the week after.
Can we sneak in a Rabbanim?
Do we have a minyan? Yeah, that would actually be good, Shelley. I know you weren't there. I would imagine you want to get a Kaddish in. Or did you leave already? All right. Go for it.
Okay, hold on. Let me get to the page.
I was going to say a cottage.
Yeah, if you like a longer Kaddish.
Oh, I don't have it.
They call Kaddish Rabbanim the Kaddish rabbis, which you do after learning. Okay. Is everybody, Judy?
Yes.
Okay, this is longer, so it may not be the one you have handy. It's a slightly different text.
Okay.
I'll try to say it slowly.
Okay, good. I'll try to do the best I can.
Okay. V'yikadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'yalma, V'ra, Firute, V'yamlich, V'chute, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, D'chol Beit Yisrael, V'gola, V'zman Koriev, V'yimru Amen. Yehesh Mei Rabba Torah, we Olam Omaya, Yiporach, Yishtabach, Yiporah, Yipomah, Yipaseh, Yihadar, Yiraleh, Shemei, Kudusha, Barichu. Ve'ela, Ve'kol, Be'achata, Ve'shirata, Tushbachata, Ve'nechata, Amira, Al Yisrael, Ve'al Rabbanan, Ve'al Talmidei Hon, Ve'al Kol Talmidei Hon, Ve'al Amen, Nuskin Haraita, Barta, Hodain, Medim, Batar, Yehe, Lachon, Shama, Rabbah, Thina, Bechista, Barakamin, Bechayin, Arichin, Mizne, Rivche, Parkanam, and Padom, Avuhon, Dishmaya, Bara, Limru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehe, Shama, Rabbah, Shmaya, Bechayim, Olenu, Bechayim, Olenu, Yaakov, Yisrael, V'yimru, Amen.
Amen.
Oseh, Shalom, Yaseh, Shalom, Olenu, Yaakov, Yisrael, V'yimru, Amen.
Amen. So if we have a mock Seder next week, then we'll pick up for a few minutes after it. Because I don't think it's going to go all the way. I think it starts at 10:30.
Does anybody know if there's going to be an interfaith Seder this year by Zoom?
I haven't heard about any. I would imagine they're doing it, but I haven't heard anything.
Don't take that off. No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, guys, take care.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.